Politicians are put there to give you the idea that you have freedom of choice. You don't. You have no choice. You have owners.
I am the Rambling Madman.
I have this feeling, man, because there's a handful of people actually run everything. That's true. It's provable. It's not I'm not a conspiracy nut.
Motherfuckers are so sensitive, the whole country is turned into bitch-ass niggas.
Hello everybody and welcome back to another episode of Ramblings of a Madman. I'm your host, Mark Ciccarello Jr., aka the Rambling Madman, and today I'm coming at you again with another episode of fresh new episode 8. We are 8 episodes in. Yeah, we're 8 episodes in, we're keeping on, and we're going to keep on churning out these episodes. Before I get into today's episode, I want to thank, I had a lot of support come into me over the past week or so for the show. First of all, I got my first 2 patrons of the show, people through Patreon donating money. That's big. That's huge for me. I genuinely appreciate that from the bottom of my heart. Any dollar amount, no matter how big or how small, goes a long way in the world of podcasting, and just paying the little small fees here and there. It goes a really long way. So, in addition to my first 2 patrons donating to me through my Patreon account, I also want to give my father a shout out. My dad is my biggest fan. He's been there supporting me since the very first episode, since before the very first episode. My dad is the first person I send out the episodes to. Before I send them out on Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Instagram, Snapchat, I always send it to my father first. And what my father does is, being the proud father that he is, and being proud that I'm going out there and trying something out, and seeing if I can make a name for myself with this podcast. He's eager to share it with everybody he can. So not only does he share it on his own social media, but he also sends it out to all his friends. And apparently his friends are pretty big fans of the show. And I absolutely love that. And it doesn't stop there. Their love for the show and their support for me, their nephew, quote-unquote nephew, goes so far. I actually just had one of my uncles, or my dad's best friends, knock on the door for me, to hand me an envelope. They're kind of old school. They don't really go through the whole Patreon thing. They're not really technologically savvy, but they do know how to put an envelope together. And they handed me an envelope with some cash to support the show. And shout out to them. Shout out to Uncle Burm, Uncle Eddie. And shout out to my dad. I'm incredibly grateful for everything everybody does, for everybody who shares, everybody who donates, everybody who supports the show, everybody who listens. And this all means a lot to me. As a small podcaster, every little thing counts. Every little share, retweet, comment, rating on Apple Podcasts goes a long way. So again, thank you guys. Thank you guys so much. In addition to that, I also realized that Ramblings of a Madman has a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts. That's fucking awesome. Shout out to you guys. It may only have 2 or 3 ratings, but they're all 5 stars. Can't beat a 5-star rating. Can't beat it. So thank you to everybody who's giving it a fucking 5-star rating. Even though it's only 3 people, shit, it means a lot. There's a lot of other motherfucking podcasts out there that aren't 5 stars. So yeah, thank you to everybody who's supporting, liking, sharing, donating, putting envelopes together, and all that. It really means a lot. Just a reminder, this show goes out on Spotify, my website, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and I think I'm going to try to get it on iHeartRadio. I'm not exactly sure how strict they are or how censoring they are with their content. I'm not sure if they're YouTube. YouTube already took down one of my videos or one of my episodes. But I am going to try to get it on iHeartRadio as well. So this episode could potentially be on my site, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, iHeartRadio. I also want to remind you guys that I do appreciate when people go through my site to listen to this show. As we enter the age of censorship and big tech, I kind of want to stray away from relying on the big tech giants to support my podcast and hold my podcast. Of course, if you want to listen on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, be my guest. I cherish each and every one of my listeners, no matter how they listen. But if you do listen through my site, it does help me a bit more than it does if you go through YouTube or Spotify or Apple Podcasts. I know it can be a little annoying to use my site if you're on mobile, which I'd assume most people are, just because I don't have a personal app. So I understand if it's too annoying to listen to it through the player on my website, it's perfectly fine to listen to it on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, wherever you want to listen to it. iHeartRadio if it's up there. But if you're enjoying the content, like I already said, I'm already having great donations come in. But if you haven't donated and you feel like you're enjoying the show and you want to support the show and keep the show running, keep it up and running, keep it going, keep the freedom of idea movement flowing, send a donation in. I mean, by no means is it necessary for you to send a donation in, but like I said, every little dollar helps. I'm going to be working on getting some merchandise ideas in for Patreon. I want to set it up so anybody who donates through Patreon gets a piece of merchandise, whether that be like a hat, a t-shirt, a hoodie, a mug, fucking bottle opener, whatever you want. I'm just waiting on getting a logo made. I'm trying to see pricing for logos and how I want to go about that and what I want my logo to be. So yeah, stay tuned for that. Of course, if you donate through other means that aren't Patreon, you're still going to get some merch. Don't worry, I'll make sure to send you that merch. So yeah, again, thank you all for supporting the show. I mean, I love each and every one of you guys. This has been awesome, creating the show and getting feedback. And even though I'm not like a huge podcaster, I have a very humble amount of listeners. But even if 50 people hear what I have to say a week, that's still 50 more people that are being woken up to the freedom of idea movement, the freedom of speech movement, the freedom of thought movement, conversations that are being started, ideas that are flowing through their heads that they may not have ever heard about before. And that's what this is all about. It's not about, becoming huge. It's not about becoming the next big podcaster, because quite honestly, I don't know if I want to become a huge podcaster, because a lot of these huge podcasters, like Joe Rogan and people like Joe Rogan, I feel like they have this unrealness quality to them, and like a fake superficial quality to them. And Joe Rogan always has like some mind-blowing topics, and he's always like smoking pot and talking about DMT and shit like that. But there's just something about him that just I don't fucking like. There's like, I feel like he's like controlled opposition, or he's like, he wants to act like he's woke just to get the fucking listeners, and it's I don't know. Maybe Joe Rogan is really like for the people, but I have my doubts. I really do. I really have my doubts about Joe Rogan. But anyway, I don't want to become like superficial by becoming some huge podcaster. I mean, obviously success is always a great thing, and success is always something that you shoot for, but I don't know. I don't want this podcast to be compromised and become some sort of fake, misleading, misinformation campaign. Speaking of misinformation, how's everybody doing? How are we doing with COVID? Are we wearing 2 masks? Are we going outside and wearing 2 masks, 3 masks, 4 masks, 5? 1 fish, 2 fish, red fish, blue fish. How many masks will you wear when you go outside today? The CDC recommends 2, but what about you? You should do 3. I literally had a customer come to my job on Friday. He was wearing an N95 mask, and underneath the N95 mask, he had a normal cloth mask and another normal cloth mask underneath that cloth mask, in addition to 2 pairs of gloves that he was wearing on his hands. And I see him walk in the door like that. I'm just like, you gotta be fucking kidding me. Anyway, it's just, it blows my mind how people are just fucking buying into this shit and fucking letting COVID, the fear of COVID, run their entire lives. And I always think, like, if you're that fucking scared of the virus, why are you even leaving your house? Just stay the fuck home. It's like the people who are like going to gyms and then reporting the gym for quote unquote violating safety or precautions and shit for COVID. Like, if you're so worried about going to the gym, if you're so worried about COVID, don't go to the fucking gym where people are trying to work out and stay healthy, better their immune systems, better their physical health, better their mental health by being around people and exercising. Don't go to the gym if you're just gonna ruin it for people because they want to pull their masks down for a little bit while they're fucking lifting weights. I'm sorry, I'm not wearing a fucking mask while I'm squatting 250. I'm just not. And I don't. Breathing in all that recycled air is not good for your body. It's not good for your immune system. It's not good for you. It's literally killing your immune system. That's what you're doing. So if you're the person who's out there wearing 3 fucking masks, 2 pairs of gloves, destroying and depleting your immune system, what's going to happen when you inevitably do get COVID? Because it's a very infectious virus, and I don't deny that. It's a very contagious virus, very contagious. So when you, Mr. I'm wearing 3 masks and 2 pair of gloves, when you do get COVID eventually, because you will, everybody's going to get it. When you get it, how is your immune system going to fight it off? When you depleted it for a year, almost going on a year, by wearing 3 fucking masks and 2 pairs of gloves every time you stepped outside of your house. Some people do it while they're inside their car, alone. And those are the people that are going to die from the virus. They really want to talk about COVID deaths and COVID infection rate? You have no fucking immune system, you're dying from the virus. You have no immune system, you're going to die from the flu. You can die from a common cold if you have no immune system, and you kill it by wearing 3 fucking masks, 2 masks, whatever the CDC recommends 2. So you're wearing 2 masks every day, you're going to fucking kill your immune system eventually. So if that's you being scared, I can't blame you for being scared, alright? The fucking media is forcing us, or forcing people to be scared, and it's... They're beating you over the head with the false number of deaths that they give you every day. They fail to mention the 6% stat that I talked about in this podcast before, and I'll repeat it again. I'll try to repeat this 6% stat from the CDC every time I do an episode. So if you're new to this podcast, or if you're new to conspiracies and you haven't been caught up on the COVID conspiracies, back in late August, early September, I think around then, the CDC put out a statistic saying that 6% of the coronavirus deaths in America are from people who actually died from COVID and COVID actually killed them. 6% of the COVID deaths are from that. The other 94% of the deaths are from people who died while they had COVID. So, like, if they were, 800 pounds and had a heart attack, but they also had COVID, it got counted as a COVID death. If they died in a car crash and they also had COVID, it counted as a COVID death. If they had heart disease or cancer, late stage cancer, and they got COVID, well, it was a COVID death. It wasn't cancer that killed them. So yeah, if you're new to that statistic, that's what it is. That's the 6% statistic on the coronavirus. So yeah, I can't blame you for being scared. Like, the media wants you to be scared, and how they willingly or they knowingly omit information like that 6% statistic. They omit it and fail to talk about it and fail to tell you about it to get you scared. So I don't blame you if you're scared, but I just wish more people who were scared would be open to hearing the other side, this argument that I'm making right here. And I wish they wouldn't be so willingly ignorant people that they would call and report establishments like gyms for people not wearing masks. Or I had a restaurant owner come into my job to get her vehicle fixed a few weeks ago, and she's struggling a lot with COVID, and she's having to take out grants and stuff and all this other stuff from the government just to stay afloat and pay their bills. And so she's running her restaurant, and then she gets a call from the health inspector saying that somebody reported her as having 2 more people in the restaurant than is allowed by health department guidelines in Pennsylvania. And that's just fucking retarded. If you're going to call and report people for that shit, why are you even out at a restaurant in the first place? Honestly, stop going out. If you're that fucking scared, don't go out. And the lady was telling me she has to have a certain amount of people in the restaurant, and it's 35 people allowed in the restaurant at all times, and that's including her staff. So, like, that's not even just 35 customers. That's including the staff. So she has to, like, limit to, like, a very bare bones crew. The bare minimum that she can work with in order to get the maximum number of customers in the door and be able to seat people. And it's just so much bullshit that these business owners, these small business owners, are having to go through. And it's sickening how we're just killing their businesses and killing their livelihoods like this. And then on top of that, we have people, normal people, calling and reporting these establishments. If you're that scared in the first place, just stay the fuck home. It's really easy. Just stay home if you're scared. And then of course we have all the news coming out about Governor Cuomo out of New York. All the news is saying that, explaining what he did in regards to the pandemic situation with the elderly, how he killed a bunch of old people, how he basically took people who had COVID, old elderly people who had COVID, and put them in certain nursing homes so that the virus would spread rapidly, and then it killed all these old people just so they could basically, cook the books and report a higher number of cases and a higher number of deaths for the coronavirus. If you haven't been paying attention to Twitter this past week, I just highly suggest you download Twitter on your phone and fucking start following some of the alternative truth movements out there and see what's really going on out there, because that's fucking wild that happened and nobody seems to be fucking talking about it. And I think that's a great place to start talking about my topic of today, which is gun control mixed in with a little bit of governments lying and committing heinous acts against its own people, a la false flag attacks, stuff like that. So this past weekend I went to a gun show. I went to a gun show with my dad and his girlfriend. And it was a pretty big gun show. There weren't quite as many people as I had thought there would be, but nonetheless it was a pretty big gun show. Lots of tables, lots of cool guns. And, basically what you'd expect at a gun show. Vendors selling beef jerky and stuff like that. I was actually quite surprised because, every gun show that I've been to before had a very large number of Trump supporters and visible Trump supporters and people wearing, like, going out of their way to wear very obnoxious Trump gear and, like, hats and shit. And there were quite a few Trump hats going around in the audience, but nobody was very obnoxious with it, which was something I just found very weird, and which I was expecting based on what I had seen at gun shows before. So it seems like people are starting to accept defeat with their candidate. Although that being said, I did see one vendor selling it was a vendor selling all this Trump merchandise, and one of the hats they were selling said Trump 2024. So I guess some people still have faith he's going to come back. I don't quite understand it, and I don't quite understand why these people who, I don't know if you ever noticed this, but most of Trump supporters, if they're not like elite wealthy businessmen, then they're like bumblefuck poor white dudes, which makes no sense to me. It makes no sense to me how, like, all these people from rural areas like Pennsylvania and down south, and like, how did they somehow come to believe that this rich, wealthy, elite businessman from New York City, one of the most liberal places in America, how did they come to believe that he, who's elite and a businessman and he has a history of being a Democrat all the way up until 2016 or 2015, I'd always voted Democrat. How did all these bumblefuck white dudes from the country areas, poor as hell, all come to support this man and think that he was one of them? I'll never understand that. Just like I'll never understand how all these people in the suburban communities and the inner cities, mainly the areas that are predominantly made up of minorities, I'll never understand how they look at Joe Biden for the most part. I'm not saying everybody in these communities, but for the most part, these communities look at Joe Biden as a fucking savior and somebody who ended racism, who's going to end racism, who's going to make the world great again, kind of like Trump supporters believed. and yeah, I just don't understand that, how, like, this rich old, out of touch, creepy white dude is going to end racism. And racism all started with the other rich, out of touch, old white dude. Because, racism didn't exist before Trump. That's how the media would lead you to believe. But yeah, I was at a gun show this weekend. Didn't quite see the number of Trump supporters that I expected, but they were still there. Saw one dude wearing a fuck Biden hat. That was pretty funny. Saw some pretty cool guns, and originally my intention was to see if I could interview some people and get some pretty interesting viewpoints for the show here. And but I didn't really come across anybody who I thought might have like an interesting or entertaining point of view. I mean, they were all just pretty cut and dry Trump supporters, the basic Trump supporters. Or there were like the most people who were there, they didn't seem to have any political identity. They weren't like, wearing Trump hats or stuff like that. They weren't making their political opinion their identity, and it didn't seem like they would be very passionate about that. I was surprised to see that people were wearing masks there. There were a lot of people wearing masks there. I actually went to another gun show a couple weeks before this one, and it seemed like nobody was wearing masks there, myself included. But at this one, it seemed like almost everybody was wearing a mask. There were a few people not wearing them, some people wearing them down below their chins. I didn't have mine on at all. I just put mine in my pocket because, fuck it. It's not like they're going to say anything. We're at a gun show. But still, there were quite a few people wearing them. And it's actually funny, you get to the door to enter the gun show, and they have a security guard there, and he asks that you put your mask on, and he also asks if you have any firearms on you. Bro, we're at a gun show. I just thought that was fucking hilarious. He asks, his job is to prevent you from bringing firearms into a gun show. But nonetheless, I didn't come across any extraordinarily entertaining people that I thought might make a good impact on this show. So I thought I would talk about, guns and the possibility of the fact that we're allowed to have guns in America, the possibility that might be taken away from us. So I'm going to talk about some things that are called false flags. And I've mentioned false flags on this show quite a bit. Any conspiracy theorist knows that false flags are the foundation for conspiracy theories. And if you don't remember what I had told you about what a false flag is, and basically what a false flag is when a government or a controlling entity over a body of people, it's when that government or controlling entity will commit an act of terror or an act of violence against their own people in order to shift their people's mindset into doing a certain thing or into being in approval of a certain way of life or a certain act. Just like how 9/11 pretty much ensured that every citizen in the country that gave a fuck about their country was going to be in favor of a war in the Middle East. And if you weren't in favor of going to the Middle East and killing brown people and wasting trillions of dollars of taxpayer dollars, if you weren't in favor of that, then you were un-American and you were unpatriotic and fuck you and all that. And just another example of a false flag that I've talked about quite a few times on the show already is Operation Northwoods, when the CIA suggested to Kennedy a plan that they should enact a terrorist plot against us, the American people, and blame it on Cuba for the sole reason of gaining the public's approval for a war with Cuba. Now, obviously, that plan didn't go through. It was vetoed. And then we all know what happened after Kennedy vetoed that. I don't need to talk about Kennedy's brains being on the streets of Texas anymore on this show. I think I've talked about that enough. But yeah, so that's what false flags are. And I'm going to talk about some things that could possibly be false flags that have happened in recent history, a lot more recent than 9/11 or the Kennedy assassination or Operation Northwoods. I'm going to talk about some things, and these things are going to touch on some nerves. And while I do believe these are false flags, or were false flags, not everybody does. So if you're hearing this and you know this and you know what a false flag is and you know that I'm talking about gun control, I'm sure you know what I'm going to bring up. And I'm going to bring up the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting. I'm going to bring up the Parkland shooting from 2018. I'm going to bring up the Vegas massacre from 2017. All of which were shootings that appear at first sight to be very tragic acts, very tragic events, and now I want to be clear before I get into talking about these things that I'm not one of those people that's like, oh, nobody died there and they're just lying, nobody died. That's not what I'm saying. It's not that I think nobody died. So when I say that I think these were false flag attacks, it's because I think your fucking government killed people. It's because I think your government killed its own people willingly, killed children willingly, killed elementary school age children willingly. Now, in the case of Sandy Hook, there are some other things in the case of Sandy Hook that are fishy, that point to, the possibility of the fatality numbers being less than were actually reported. But I don't think that's just a possibility. I do believe that people died there, just like people died in Parkland and people died in Vegas during the Vegas shooting at the Mandalay Bay Hotel. So I don't want anybody to stop listening here because they think, oh, he's just another one of those people who think nobody died. That's not what I'm saying. Just like people who get so caught up about 9/11 when you like very staunch conservatives get so caught up about 9/11 and think you're being un-American when you say that something fishy went on there. No, dude, I don't hate America. I don't hate my fellow Americans. It just doesn't add up to me that jet fuel can't melt steel beams, but somehow the hijacker's fucking passport landed on top of all the rubble untouched and able to be read and identified by investigators. Something doesn't add up there. And when stuff doesn't add up, I think it's our jobs as citizens and everyday people. Fuck being citizens of the United States. It's our jobs as human beings to call out when the people in control of us may be up to no good. And let's get something straight here. I'm no constitutionalist. I couldn't give two shits about the Constitution. My personal opinion on the Constitution is that it's a big document written by a bunch of fucking slave owners telling people what they're allowed to do. It's not them giving you the freedom that you think you have. It's them saying, this is what you're allowed to do, and I'm allowing you to do it. I can take away these rights at any time. You ever heard of the Patriot Act? Basically what the Patriot Act says is if you're accused by the government of being a terrorist, they don't need proof, they don't have to prove anything in the courts, they can take away your rights. They can kidnap you, take away your rights, and you have no more rights as an American citizen. So if tomorrow, and I'm just going to say Joe Biden because it's an easy example. If tomorrow Joe Biden says, anybody making podcasts that's giving false information on the coronavirus, like being against wearing masks and being against the coronavirus vaccine, if anybody's talking about that on podcasts, they're a domestic terrorist now. Those people are terrorists and they're out to harm the American people. So they're not allowed to do that anymore. And if people are talking about this on the internet, they are domestic terrorists and we will shut them down. So then that's what Biden says tomorrow, and then on Friday the FBI is knocking on my door and they arrest me. And they say that I'm being accused of being a domestic terrorist. They put me in the back of their van and they take me off to God knows where. And I have no more rights because under the Patriot Act, I'm a domestic terrorist. The Constitution no longer applies to me. So yes, your rights were given to you by old, out-of-touch white men, slave owners, and they can be taken away by the old, out-of-touch white men who still run this country. So no, I don't give a fuck about the Constitution. I'm an anarchist. A true anarchist. I don't mean like you see Antifa out there fucking rioting and burning things in the street. That's not anarchism. When I say I'm an anarchist, that means I'm in support of the absolute and complete freedom of the individual. That means I'm in support of the absolute and the complete freedom of the individual. That people should be able to do as they please and self-police themselves. Kind of like the Wild West. Only it won't be as bloody as the Wild West because we're a lot more civilized now than we were in the 1840s. or the 1850s. So let me ask you this. Do you know what's right and what's wrong? To all the adults here that are listening to this show, are you capable of determining what's right and what's wrong? What's good and what's bad? What we as communities should be doing to support each other? I'd hope that you guys are saying, yes, you are able to make those decisions. Because everybody who's a mature adult here is able to make those decisions. But yet we relinquish those responsibilities and give that power to the government, who in return tells us what we can and can't do, who in return gives us the Constitution that they can take away. So no, I'm not a constitutionalist. I'm not going to talk about the Second Amendment, because fuck it. Fuck the Constitution. But I am going to talk about guns, and how there is, I believe, a push or a surge within the federal government to disarm the American people. Do you remember that shooting that it happened back in 2017, 4 years ago, February 2017? I think it's almost exactly 4 years ago. It was I think it was Valentine's Day. I think it was Valentine's Day that the shooting happened in Florida, the Parkland shooting. I think the school was Parkland High School in Broward County, Florida. And this is a rhetorical question, obviously. Everybody remembers that shooting, or at least a little bit. 17 people were killed. 17 people were fucking killed at Parkland High School. But did anybody ever dig deep into, the background of that shooting? And all the fucked up shit that doesn't make sense? Let's talk about the shooter for a little bit. His name was Nicholas Cruz, a student there. A troubled student. A student who had been reported to the police multiple occasions, on multiple times, for violent acts, for killing his neighbor's animals, for being like a little psychopath. He was reported to police. And the police didn't do anything about it. The police basically just turned him loose every time. But it wasn't just the police. No. He was investigated by the FBI as well before the shooting. Because I bet most of you don't know this, and this is going to be almost hard to believe, but Nicholas Cruz, the kid who shot up the school in Parkland, he left a comment on a YouTube video before the shooting. I think it was like a year or so before the shooting, and he left a comment on the video. The comment on the video said, "I want to be a school shooter," and that comment was reported, and then that's how he got investigated by the FBI. And the FBI basically said that he wasn't a threat and that they didn't have time to investigate him because they didn't deem him to be that much of a threat. But you know what the FBI did have time to investigate in 2017? The Trump-Russia collusion scandal. They had time to investigate that bullshit. But they didn't have time to investigate this fucking weirdo psychopath that killed 17 kids. And to be clear, I'm not advocating for Trump. I don't want anybody to get confused here. Just because I don't believe in the Trump-Russia narrative doesn't mean that I'm a Trump supporter. I mean, you just open your eyes here a little bit. Putin hates Trump. Everything that Putin stands for, Trump is against. Why would Putin get Trump elected? I mean, we've been down this road before with the communism in the 50s. McCarthyism, where the government just said a bunch of people were communists and then, they were just blackballed, expelled from their industries, fired from their jobs. They were working with the Ruskies. That's what Trump-Russia was. It was a distraction. But nonetheless, it was something that the FBI deemed to be more necessary than to investigate than the kid who wound up killing 17 people at his school. And I think he had an AR-15. So he used the AR-15, he killed 17 people. Now, there was also a video around the time that came out, it was on, I forget what news. state. I forget what news station did it or what big morning show did the report. But basically, what happened on the morning of the shooting is that this kid got an Uber to the school, and he was dressed in like a fucking flak jacket and shit like that. Like he was wearing a helmet and shit, and he had a fucking AR-15. And he just got an Uber to the school, and like the Uber driver didn't see anything wrong with that. And then he got out and started shooting up the fucking school. But he wasn't wearing any of that shit when he came out of the school. But it was reported that he was wearing it when he went in. So he took his clothes off in the school, or his protective gear, and killed 17 people. And then right after the shooting, you had that kid David Hogg. I hate that fucking kid, David Hogg. He attended Parkland High School. But it just so happened that he wasn't there the day of the shooting. And he became like this gun activist. This teenage gun activist. He's like fucking 17, 18 years old, and all of a sudden he knows everything in the world there is to know about guns and why they're so dangerous and bad for society. And why we should all guns should be banned, and all gun owners are bad and horrible people. Everybody was using him as the authority on guns. Like even now, if you Google his name, this is what pops up. David Miles Hogg is an American gun control activist and entrepreneur. He is the co-founder of Good Pillow, a pillow manufacturing company. Before entering business, he became prominent during the 2018 United States gun violence protests as a student, survivor of the Stoneman Douglas High School shooting, helping lead several high-profile protests, marches, and boycotts, including the boycott of the Ingram Angle. That's from Wikipedia. Even though he wasn't a survivor of the shooting, because he told CBS, this is his quote from the day of the shooting, or this is his quote about the shooting. On the day of the shooting, I got my camera and got on my bike and rode as fast as I could 3 miles from my house to the school to get as much video and to get as many interviews as I could, because I knew that this could not be another mass shooting. So his classmates, this kid's classmates, were just slaughtered in the hallways of the school. He just happened to not be there, and David Hogg was like one of the leaders of the acting club or the drama club at that school. He just happened to not be there. And his first thought when he heard something went down at the school was not about the welfare of his classmates and who was alive and who made it out and I hope all my friends are okay. That's not what he was thinking about. His first thought was to get to the school and get as much video and interviews as he could in order to prevent more mass shootings. That doesn't seem fishy to you? It's like he was just waiting for this moment to happen. And then all of a sudden he's thrust into the national spotlight. And he's made an instant star in the news. And he's the go-to authority on gun control. Get the fuck out of here. It shows exactly what's wrong with society today. We give all these people platforms that shouldn't have platforms. And I guess that comes with the rise of social media, right? That, all these people who shouldn't be voicing their opinions, they get to voice their opinions now. And sometimes, or most of the time, I should say, these people are the people who gain the most following. Well, David Hogg is one of those people. I'll never understand why we give so much power to the opinion of the young people, the young, uneducated people who have no experience in life. Why do we give them so much power to make decisions and become the authorities on gun control? Or like Greta Thunberg. How the fuck old was Greta Thunberg when her popularity exploded? Was she like 13? And all of a sudden she's the expert on climate change and global warming? Like, get the fuck... I'm so tired of that shit. Them using, A, people who are victims of tragedies, or B, young people who, might have done good in school, and now, they're just going to use them because they can get them to believe in anything that they want them to. They can get them to believe in anything that they want them to believe in. So because they were, good speakers in school and had good grades, they're gonna make stars out of them in the news and make them authorities on ideologies that they know nothing the fuck about. Greta Thunberg, if you haven't noticed, knows more than your local scientist. Greta Thunberg is, right up there with the scientist. She was just like a little kid, but she knows that these scientists are telling the truth here. David Hogg has never shot a gun in his life. Never been around guns in his life. But all of a sudden he's the leading expert on gun control, who happened to be like in the drama club and happened to have his first thought be of getting interviews and videos and footage of the shooting. That's what he wanted to do, not check up on his classmates. That's what we got to be an authority on gun control in America in 2018. It's almost like you can't make this shit up. And I'm not exactly sure what year I said this had happened in, but the Parkland shooting happened in 2018, and if I said 2017, I do apologize. The Vegas shooting, which I'm about to talk about, actually happened in 2017. So I think I flip-flopped the two. Not that it makes a huge difference, but just to clarify. Now I think the Vegas shooting may be a little bit more under the radar than the Parkland shooting when it comes to conspiracies and surrounding shootings and false flags and stuff like that. I really think that one might be more under the radar, but I do want to bring the Vegas shooting up because the first time I ever got an instinct to make a podcast was after the Vegas shooting, because there's just so much fucked up shit about that Vegas shooting that it just clicked to me. It just clicked in my mind. I was like, I have to make a podcast. I have to do something. I have to make an outlet or get the word out there that something fucked up is going on. There's some fuckery going on. And I actually did make a podcast back in 2017 when that happened, and I called it the Lone Wolf Podcast, and I made one episode, and I put it on I put it on SoundCloud, and that was it. I never made another episode. It wasn't like now when I'm pumping out an episode every week. I made one episode, and I was pretty proud of it. I thought it turned out pretty good, and I can't find the episode anywhere. I don't remember my SoundCloud information or anything, but I thought it was pretty good. It was called Lone Wolf Podcast, but anyway, this is one of those things that inspired me or fueled my passion. At the time, I still wanted to be a journalist, and this is one of those things that fired up my passion, for getting the truth out there and exposing the fuckery and all that. So the Vegas shooting happened in October of 2017, and there's just so much. There's so much to unpack here. But basically, what happened in the Vegas shooting, or the official narrative of the Vegas shooting, is that this man in his mid to late 50s, I think he was 58, and he was very out of shape. He weighed, I think almost like 300 pounds, and he lugged 23 big guns up to his hotel room, and then he unleashed fire down at the music festival below his hotel room going on outside, and he struck 58 people. He killed 58 people, wounded like 500. Those are like wartime casualty numbers. That he did that all by himself with one weapon, firing with a bump stock. And if you don't know what a bump stock is, it's very simple. Basically, what a bump stock is it's something that you can put on your weapon to reduce the recoil and make it so you can shoot faster. It does not make your weapon fully automatic, but it makes it so you can shoot faster. Anyway, that's the official narrative of the shooting. As far as what actually happened, well, I guess nobody actually knows what actually happened unless you believe in the official narrative, which I believe is a crock of shit. But let's go into the background of Stephen Paddock, the shooting of the Vegas massacre, who killed apparently 58 people and wounded 500. Paddock was a very private man. He was a very rich man. He made a living off of playing video poker, and he was good at it. He was good at gambling. And he was also a gun enthusiast. And he was also, middle-aged or late middle-aged and a white man. Now, this isn't me saying, they're coming for the white man. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying all those things combined make him one of the usual suspects for things like this. Okay, so he fit the description perfectly of what the stereotypical shooter would look like in a situation like this. Except for maybe the fact that he was out of shape. And this man was able to kill 58 people and wound 500. And it doesn't matter, the official narrative doesn't care that there were reports coming on the police radio saying that there were shots coming from multiple floors of the hotel. I believe they even said there was shots coming from the roof. On the ground, there was shots reported coming from the ground, on the ground floor, like outside. There was like a hit squad of people shooting that night. And it was reported all through the police radio scanners that there were shots being reported from all these different locations. Yet the news made no mention of them. None whatsoever. And of course, when I go back to find these videos that I saw 4 years ago, they're nowhere to be found. They've all been taken down from YouTube. But there's also some other interesting information you should know. There's a security guard. His name was Jesus Campos. He was a security guard, and he knocked on the door of He knocked on Paddock's hotel room door. And apparently he knocked on Paddock's hotel room door 6 minutes before the shooting started. And then 1 minute before the shooting started, he was killed. Or he was shot. Then after the shooting was over, Jesus Campos, the guard that was shot by Stephen Paddock, his house was under like intense security, and he was not allowed to give interviews to anybody, to the news or anything. And then Campos, he disappeared. He was slated to give 5 interviews, including one on Fox News. But then he disappeared, and nobody, not even the FBI, knew where he was. Or where he is. I don't know if he's been found or not. But when he was due to give 5 interviews, including the Fox News, he disappeared. Stephen Paddock, the shooter, also had no social media. There was no trace. He left behind him no trace of anything. He was into video poker, so he wasn't necessarily behind the times. He just had no social media presence, which was weird. So it's just like there was a bunch of shit that went on with this Vegas shooting that it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't add up. Doesn't make sense, and it just made me it made my hair stand on edge. Made me realize that something was going on there that shouldn't be happening. And if you want to know what I believe happened there back in 2017 with the Vegas shooting, I believe that one of two things is possible. The CIA and the FBI were watching Paddock like a hawk. They painted him as the perfect target to be the mastermind, the quote-unquote mastermind behind this big attack. So, they follow his every move, and they learn that he's going to be in Vegas on the same night that there's going to be a music festival. So they see this as the perfect opportunity to take this man, slander him, and make him look like he did something evil. So I think what might have happened is they were watching him like a hawk, and they found out he was going to be in Vegas at the Mandalay Bay, and there was going to be a music festival, and they were like, this seems like the perfect opportunity to make something happen. And then maybe he was playing poker at the casino. And then the next thing he knows, he's being escorted away from the poker table and led up to a room. And maybe that's it. Maybe that's where Stephen Paddock's story ended. And then the shooting began. Because like I said earlier, there was reports coming through the police radios that there were shots being fired from all different levels of the hotel, all different floors. I believe there was one report of shots being fired from on top of the building. There were even reports of shots being fired from the ground level outside. So that all adds up to multiple shooters, not just Stephen Paddock. So I don't think he did any of the shooting at all. I think they found this perfect opportunity. They kidnapped him, put him in the room, and unleashed fire. And then after everything was done, they used him as their scapegoat. That's one way of looking at it. Or the other slightly different way of looking at it is that Stephen Paddock was involved in it and was only involved in it, though, because of a PSYOP, a psychological operation in which the CIA or the FBI would have, brainwashed him into believing a certain motive and tricked him into doing what he did or supposedly did. Still, I believe there would have had to have been more than one shooter, so it wouldn't have been him alone. But nonetheless, there was some fuckery going on. Most people are like, well, why would the government do this? Why would they want to kill their own people? Why would they want to do that? Surely they're not that evil. Well, back in 2012, there was this thing called the Smith-Mundt Modernization Act of 2012. Basically what that did is it made propaganda legal. It made it legal for the government to use propaganda again. And that's all you need to know. It's legal for the government to use propaganda. Go Google or search on DuckDuckGo about the Smith-Mundt Modernization Act of 2012. Google it. It made propaganda legal. And that comes into play because, well, now they have these big heinous acts of violence, and they have them and they can use them to create propaganda. And you have to remember that propaganda is false information that's put out there to change the way that the public thinks about something. That's put out there to inspire certain feelings and invoke emotions. Kind of like, the propaganda posters you see of World War II. The racist ones that promote violence against Japanese people. So now they have these big events, and they can use them to promote, to change the way people think, and feel about guns. Just like with the Parkland shooting, David Hogg became the instant gun advocate. Instantaneously, he became the go-to authority on opinions for gun control. Having never picked up a gun and shot a gun in his entire life, he was the go-to authority for gun control. They used what had happened, and they turned it into basically a PSYOP, a psychological operation, to change the way that you think and the way that you feel. Whether you believe that those shootings were false flags done by the government or not, you can't tell me that what happened after those shootings, like David Hogg and those movements that happened, that they weren't propaganda movements. So the false flag thing you want to debate, you can debate it, but you can't deny that they used these events to inspire propaganda and use propaganda and change the way the opinions of people are on guns. And that's just something to think about. You don't have to accept it as fact, but just think about it. I'm going to leave off there. I know I said I was going to talk about Sandy Hook, but this episode went on a bit longer than I thought it was going to go on, and I think I made a good point. I think I made a good enough point talking about what I have talked about so far. If I want to do a second episode on gun control, on guns in general, I'll talk about Sandy Hook when I do that. But as for right now, I think I'm going to wrap this up here. I think I did a nice job at explaining what I wanted to explain. And yeah, I'm going to wrap things up. I want to thank each and every one of you for tuning in for another episode of Ramblings of a Madman. Remember, if you're listening to this podcast and you're enjoying it, be sure to try and use it through my site. If that's too much of an issue and using Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube, and potentially iHeartRadio, if it's just way more convenient for you to use them, by all means, go ahead. Also, please consider donating to me through Patreon to keep the show up and running and running smoothly and without any hiccups. I'm thinking of a timeline in my head for future episodes. I think what I'm going to do is when I get to 10 episodes in, so that would be 2 more episodes after this. When I get to episode 10, I think I'm going to take a break for a week or 2, and I'm going to use that week or 2 to plan out more content for you guys to keep coming in. Maybe I'll take a break after every 10 episodes or so. Around a 1 to 2 week break, maybe 3, in between each episode, and in between every 10 episodes. And I think that could be very useful to me. And I'm planning out some things with some big guests, another big guest. I've been in contact with The Odd Man Out. He has his podcast called The Oddcast, featuring The Odd Man Out. And he has a very good political podcast where he talks about, lots of political things and gives his opinions, many of which I share the same opinions in. And his podcast is pretty big, and he was on the Tinfoil Hat podcast with Sam Tripoli. So yeah, he's an up and coming podcaster. He's certainly a lot bigger than myself. So I'm excited to work on some content with him. I'm hoping to get him in for next week's episode. So hopefully recording with him this upcoming weekend. And so that's some exciting things going on there. I've also been in contact with some other new podcasters that are just as new as myself. I'm looking to get some content out with them. So I got some ideas flowing, some great people and great minds that I'm working with and talking with, and together we're going to create some awesome content. I want to remind everybody to keep on keeping on. Remember that we're all gods out here, and I want everybody to have a wonderful day.